what's so funny? What are you laughing at?" And she looks at me and she says, "It's about time." I said, "About time for what?" And she says, "I have been waiting for you to step up for months."
Hello and welcome to the Dad Dialogue Podcast, the show where we talk about the successes and the stresses of becoming a dad and being a dad. My name is Laurence and I am your host. Thank you so much for listening today. Quick reminder, you can go over to daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to get in touch with the show or register to be a guest on a future episode. Today's guest is CJ. In our conversation with CJ, we talk about his abusive upbringing, being in an abusive home, and how that kind of led him down a dark road in terms of becoming an alcoholic and leaning on that as a big part of his life. But also we hear the positive signs and the positive light to his story about how he overcame that and how he was then able to welcome his daughter into the world through this woman that he met, and how he became a stepfather and is now this girl's father. Such a beautiful story. I really appreciated hearing CJ share. We talk about lots of other things about how to best implement learning strategies with kids as well. So much to get into. Let's get into the conversation. CJ, thank you so much for joining us on the Dad Dialogue podcast today. Can you just start off by telling our listeners just a little bit about yourself and your family?
Yeah, of course. It's first off, I want to say it's really good to be here. And if I can, I'd like to give a shout out to my daughter. She's going to love it. Jasmine, hi. Daddy loves you.
Awesome.
So about me, I had a lot of childhood abuse growing up. And one of the most prevalent issues in my life as a child and young teenager was the fact that I didn't have much of a father figure. And so I developed an addiction to alcohol as an adult. And I had a lot of failed relationships because of the issues as a child that I really wasn't addressing. And so when I finally met my current wife, and she had a 6-year-old at the time, one of my biggest problems was believing in myself as a father figure.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's kind of where my journey is at right now with my own content that I put out, my website and my books, is basically I want to give the message to people that it's okay to talk about these things. And so that's what I'm really big on, is just talking, because, and I listen to people too. I never promise that I can do anything about it. But what I found over the course of my journey is that just by being someone that people can talk to, being a listener, not a problem solver, just a listener, seems to help a lot of people tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the amount of times that I myself and other people as well need to process something either by talking to someone or even just talking, journaling or creating something. It's such an important aspect of life to, if you go through something, to be able to talk about it and process it. And I like how you kind of have prioritized that, and that's such an important part of you to kind of be aware of this maybe traumatic childhood, but not let it consistently define you. Maybe there was a time in your life that you felt that. Would you agree that there was a time in your life that you let childhood trauma define you?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When I was real heavy into my drinking career, and that's a phrase that I've learned to use, drinking career, because that's essentially what I did with it. I made it who I was. And I got to the point where that was the only thing I knew how to do to quiet anything that was going on in my head, to where I didn't even know what was going on up there anymore. And it was a daily thing every single night. I would go to work, I'd come home, and I would drink until I went to bed. And that was a daily occurrence for me for a few years, until I realized that, my only two options were to either stop drinking or essentially just die.
So what caused that realization?
Well, okay. So I remember there's a thing called rock bottom. And for a lot of people, you have to hit a rock bottom before you can choose to start the healing process. And for me, my rock bottom was I got off of work on my Friday, and I went to the liquor store and I bought a fifth of vodka, the cheapest vodka that I could find. And I told myself, okay, well, I'll make it through the weekend on this. So I came home and I woke up at 7 a.m. the next morning on my bedroom floor, and the bottle was empty.
Right.
And that's kind of where I had realized that I had a problem before, but this was the first time that it really kind of blew my mind, that because I knew it was an honest truth in my mind that this was going to I was going to make it through the weekend on this. It was just, there was no doubt about it. And then when I woke up, everything was shattered. And so my response to this realization was to go to the liquor store at 7 a.m. and get another pint. But my neighbor saw me, and she begged me not to go into the liquor store, and all I could say was, I have to. I didn't know why I had to, but I believed that I had to do that. But from there, you know, I finally got online. I found a couple people, a couple professionals to talk to. I got in therapy and I got on some medication. And I'm not going to say that, you know, the healing process, here's the thing, is that the healing process isn't linear. You know, you're going to heal a little bit, and then you're going to fall, and then you're going to heal, and then you're going to fall. But the thing is as long as you keep trying, failure is part of the process to me. And so that's what I had to go through. That was my rock bottom when I finally realized this is going to end me if I don't do something about it.
Wow. And I appreciate you sharing. First of all, we've got into it deep early on, which is, I love it. It's awesome. Like, let's not beat around the bushes. Let's just get into it. So I'm curious, what did the timeline look like in terms of this process, and then in terms of when you did meet your now wife and becoming part of your now daughter's life? What does the timeline look like between these two kind of life events, let's say?
Well, even the relationship wasn't linear. Here's the thing, was I was working at a fast food restaurant, and Kim came through with Jasmine, who was 6 years old at the time. And every time they came by, when I would hand out her card back or her change or whatever, or her food, I'd say, "Here you go, pretty lady." And she knew, even though I didn't. I was just trying to say that I thought she was attractive. But apparently, see, here's the thing: is Kim doesn't beat around the bush either. So I've learned to just be completely upfront. So that her process has kind of worn off on me a little bit and become my process. And so this was, we started dating September 25th of 2021.
Right. Okay.
And we actually broke up. Let me be clear on this one. Kim broke up with me because I honestly I had a lot of problems. I did. And so she broke up with me right at the end of March the following year. And so I started therapy on March 21st. I got sober on March 27th, and Kim broke up with me on March 29th.
Wow.
And one of the things she always was trying to tell me was that you are a good man, but I couldn't hear it. She would tell me, you're a good man and you can be a good father. But I had it in my head that because I didn't have a father figure, and I had an alcohol problem, and I didn't know how to handle my own mental health, I had it in my head that I was a bad person. But after a month or so, I stayed sober, and I realized that I have to do it for me. I can't do it for her. I can't do it for Jasmine. I can't do it for my job or anybody else in the world. I have to do this for me. Otherwise, it's not going to stick. And so we started talking about a month later. She, you know, how are you doing? And I didn't even tell her I had gotten sober because I needed to know that I was doing it for me.
Yeah.
And I was worried that by telling her that I was getting sober, then it would become a thing I was doing for her.
This is really interesting. Like, I haven't really spoken to anyone about like an alcoholic's journey, because I'm just starting to realize like things are going around in my head, but it's all based on what I've seen in TV. And the character in the show goes to AA and this, that, and the other, and the character in the and I've realized that for this big part of this big kind of emotional journey that people go through, I'm curious how much of my understanding is actually based in any sort of reality. That is probably, we don't need to go too deep into that, but I'm just kind of coming to realize that. So I'm just curious, was there any kind of support from a therapist or a support group in terms of how to manage a relationship and what that looked like whilst trying to deal with the alcoholism?
Well, what I can tell you now, AA stands for Alcoholics Anonymous,
Mm-hmm.
but in the group, they're very clear about what the anonymous means. So I can talk about like my journey,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not allowed to talk about other people's journeys. It's
Yeah.
just the respect of privacy. They can talk about them. I can talk about me.
Mm-hmm.
And I make it very clear that I'm willing to talk about me, because
Mm.
there's a lot of people out there that don't know these things, and there's a lot of people
Mm.
out there that are going through the same issues but don't have any feedback, and they don't have information, and they don't have any real guidance whatsoever.
Mm.
So what I can tell you about AA is that the whole idea of a bunch of sad, lonely, dirty old men sitting in a room together
Mm.
is completely wrong.
Right.
These are groups of people that have gone through a journey and are willing to show up at a meeting
Mm.
every so often, however often they want to do it, and just talk about the things that they've gone through. And it's funny how many jokes and how much laughter that you get at these meetings if you're
Mm.
willing to. But they're not going to make fun of you for telling your stories, no matter
Mm.
how bad those stories might be, because chances are there's at least one other person in the room that's done the same thing as you.
Right.
So
That's interesting.
there is a bit of a misnomer when it comes to AA.
Mm. Yeah, because I'm just thinking that there's so many, I think so many references in television and movies, yet I don't think it's something that people who haven't had an experience or known someone going through it would really know kind of anything about the actual process or what it actually looks like. And so, yeah, appreciate
Mm-hmm.
you sharing. So let's get into becoming a father then to your daughter. So what did that look like in terms of dating your now wife and starting to build a relationship? Was the process, was there kind of boundaries put in place in terms of the relationship you had with her initially? I've had a couple of dads on the show before, and we've spoken about this, and I find it super interesting, kind of the nuance and the details of making sure that everyone's kind of being, what's the word, valued in the relationship, to ensure that everyone is kind of protected in some
Mm-hmm.
way. Does that kind of ring true for your experience?
Yeah. What I can tell you about my relationship specifically is that uh, some in Kim's past relationships, she's very protective of her daughter, and I understand
Yeah.
that she's very protective of Jasmine. And but because I was working a drive-through window and I saw them twice a week,
Mm.
it gave me this like odd little back door,
Mm. Yeah.
so that when Kim and I actually started dating, I already knew her daughter.
Mm.
And so she knew that I wasn't the type of person that she had to protect her daughter against.
Okay.
So otherwise, it might have been 6-8 months before I
Mm.
ever even knew she had a child. But early on, I remember after dating for probably 4 or 5 months, Jasmine started to slip these little family playtime things in, where she wanted to pretend that we were daddy and daughter.
Right.
And I mean, of course, I was 37 years old, so I saw straight through it, and I thought it was absolutely adorable that
Yeah.
she wanted to play house and I was dad.
Mm.
And because she hasn't had, there's one big connection that I have with Jasmine, and that's what really got me early on, was that she's never met her actual father.
Right.
So, and when he found out that Kim was pregnant, he kind of made himself scarce. And so I felt that, like, I immediately, once I found that out, I felt that exact pain that Jasmine was feeling. And so after about 4 or 5 months, she asked me if it would be okay if she called me dad.
Wow.
And I remember this flood of emotions, all these mixed emotions, because I didn't think I could be a good dad.
Yeah.
And so for one, I was genuinely terrified. But for two, I knew that I loved Kim, and I knew that I wanted to be a father as much as she wanted to have a father.
Right.
I had no idea how to do it. So there was a lot of these emotions. There was the fear, there was the empathy that I felt, and so many of these other things. I didn't know what to do at the time, but I knew one way or another I was going to have to press forward, even though I wasn't sure of myself in any way whatsoever.
I think it's so interesting that I think men are wired in such a way that I don't think it matters what their actual life experience is. When push comes to shove, almost every dad I've spoken to at some point had that I can't be a good dad moment. It might be when their wife is pregnant. It might be when they're out of class. It might be when their baby is screaming. It might be when their kid is 2 years old. And like, whatever it is, it doesn't. And even if they've had a loving father themselves, everyone has it. Like, if they've had that loving father that's been there, maybe they don't feel as though they can live up to their father. And if they haven't had that loving father, then it's like, how am I ever going to be a loving father if I didn't see that happen myself? Or if my dad died when I was young? And I don't know if women have this as well, but it seems to be level across the board. And there's obviously everyone's story and nuances is different in that regard. But I'm right there with you in terms of just like, yeah, there were some really tough times of just like, I can't do this. Like, I'm not going to be like, how, if I can currently, you get into the vicious cycle of, if I'm currently feeling this way before my child is here or before I've become a father, and I'm doubting myself and my emotions are not in a point right now to do this, how am I ever going to provide, like, emotionally for a child? Because that's what fatherhood is like, we provide financially and we provide a roof, but we also have to provide emotional support and a healthy balance of emotions. Yeah, almost every dad I've spoken to can relate in some way. The story looks completely different for different people, but the actual feeling, the outcome is almost always exactly the same. So what did you do to try kind of like push through that?
Well, I at that time, because I hadn't actually started therapy yet and I hadn't gotten sober, I knew these were things that I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to do them. See, I trusted Kim, and so a lot of the inner turmoil that I was having, I put it on her because I didn't trust anybody else.
Right.
And so that was, and it was 6 months of me pretty much unloading all of my problems on her. And yeah. And understandably, eventually she got burnt out. I mean, no matter how much you love a person, you can't be everything to them. They have to be able to have other people that can take care of things for them. And for me, it was a therapist and a sponsor. But she couldn't be those things because she doesn't have a therapy license, and she's never been to AA. She's never had an addiction. She's never had to do that. And so after months of me putting all of these things on her, and mental health takes on a lot of different faces. For me, it was a fear of her leaving me, or a fear that I had finally gotten something good in my life and I didn't deserve it. And one way or the other, the energy of the universe was going to come strike lightning and straighten it out for me. And that was a genuine fear that I had a long time. And so what I finally had to do was start taking care of these problems myself with other people.
Yeah.
And that was about the time that she broke up with me because she couldn't do it anymore.
Mm.
But she had started that ball rolling to where I could tell that, okay, well, I'm throwing too much stuff on you. I
Mm.
just don't know who else to go to. But
Mm-hmm.
eventually I finally figured it out, thank goodness.
So it sounds as though you get to the point of having the support network in place, the places to go that is kind of looking outward rather than always looking inward. Because I find obviously the trouble of trying to deal with something that that's related to trauma or addiction or whatever it might be, if we're always looking inward to ourselves, that is obviously a recipe for disaster. I think everyone knows that it can be very
Mm-hmm.
difficult if we're always just looking inward. But then when you're in a relationship, that becomes looking inward as well, because like that's your partner that you're trying to do life with, and yes, this person can't be all these other things to you. So it sounds as though having this support network in place, a sponsor, a therapist, that then allowed you to kind of like take some of that weight off to then push through as a father. So I'm curious, you obviously alluded to it a little bit. We don't need to go into the details, but I'm just curious how much of an impact on your parenting now that your relationship with your dad has had, if that makes any sense. Have you found stepping into the role of father and growing as a father, do you ever think back to the relationship with your dad?
Oh yeah, all the time, all the time. And by the way, I hope it's okay that my cat decided to be in this episode.
It's okay.
Um, she just jumped up on my lap.
I'm sure video engagers will love it. Get a little bit of
Oh,
extra engagement.
yeah, yeah. I actually have two daughters. This is my first one. So there's been plenty of times. There have been plenty of times that my relationship with my father has kind of bled into this relationship that I have with Kim,
Mm,
and that's even changed over time. The way
right.
that my relationship with my father has affected me. Early
Mm,
on in the relationship, there were a lot of triggers that I didn't know how to process. I didn't know
mm,
how to talk about them, and so Kim would say or do something somehow that reminded me of my father, even if I didn't know that's what was going on. And something in me, my therapist would call it my inner child, but something
mm,
in me would react to that with the same fear that I felt towards my dad when I was a child.
mm,
And it took several months for me to get through that or even begin to get through that. Now, what I see is I'm able to I can process these triggers a lot quicker, and I can just kind of take a moment to myself and kind of decipher
mm,
what's going on. You know, now I'll give a general example. My dad, as a kid, my dad had this thing where he would promise me something, or he would say, hey, "We'll do this. I'll be there." Especially after my parents divorced, where he would have a schedule, and it would be
mm-hmm.
his weekend, and we were supposed to go over there for his weekend, and he would promise to be there. And so we would go over to knock on his door, and nobody would answer, and we wouldn't hear from him for another week.
Wow.
And so early on in our relationship, when we were going out on dates, she would say, "Hey, let's go out to dinner. I'll meet you at Wendy's or something at 5:30." And I would not trust her to be there. And I didn't really understand early on why I felt that way about her, even
Mm,
after she could have showed up 100 straight times on time, but I would still feel that.
yeah.
I would still feel that fear that I would
Mm-hmm.
get there and she wouldn't be there and I wouldn't get a text or a call. And so I had to process through all that.
Mm,
And it took time. You know,
of
again,
course.
recovery, mental health, none of this, it's healing, it's not linear.
Mm,
And so I'd have to process that. And there were plenty of times where I thought I was to the point where, okay, I know what's going on, I'm over it.
mm,
And I'd be good for a few weeks, and then something would come up, and it it wouldn't be something that she said or did on purpose, and it wouldn't even be something that she said or did that was wrong per se, but it would be something that reminded me in some way of something that I went through as a child with my father, and then I would trigger. And I would need to text her and say, hey, where are you? Are you on your way? But because she was raised in a healthy, loving family, she didn't understand that. And so
Yeah.
that was a really big thing that me and her had to get through. Because, I mean, she's the daughter of the pastor over here at one of our local churches here in Cheyenne. And so she was raised in a pretty solid family, whereas I wasn't. I had an alcoholic father and a codependent mother, and we were part of I won't get into details on what religion it was, but we were in a religion that basically dictated our lives. And so I didn't get to think for myself.
Right.
So I was basically raised in a childhood full of trauma, and she was raised in a childhood full of love. But we worked through it with communication. We talked about it. And once I knew how to talk about it and what these things were that were going on in my head, then I was able to kind of bring it to the surface and say, hey, this is what I'm feeling. This is why I'm afraid. And she wouldn't always understand it, but it would at least give her that first stepping stone so that she could help me work to a certain point. And then I got into therapy so that I could have a professional actually do it with me.
That's a really thank you for sharing. That's a really powerful story, and I think there's a couple of things I want to highlight from what you just said. First of all, the communication, with your partner, to ensure that things are being worked through, and I find, in terms of communication, especially for something like this, it's such a heavy topic. It's almost, you need to communicate, but it's not everything needs to be said, because it's an issue. As you said, you're now going to your therapist to communicate with that person and process with that person. As long as you're communicating with your partner, what the important things are, and so I need to bring this, this, and this to my partner, but I need to take this, this, and this to the therapist, or take this, this, and this to AA. Then you can start to kind of sort out your brain. And I'm no neuro expert or a therapist, but the more people I talk to and the more people's stories I hear, it's just such a reminder that of the neural pathways that are formed when we're young and our brains are developing, because when we're children, our brains are developing at such a rapid stage that responses and feelings and emotions are being formed throughout that whole journey. And then when we're adults, we can feel something as a response to something, but that's just because our brain is so used to doing that because of maybe trauma or how we were raised or a previous experience, or going into fight and flight for a certain aspect. And it's no one's fault. It's just how the brain has been developed. And it takes a lot of unlearning and relearning of, like you said, take a moment to yourself and just take a few breaths. And it's such an important part, everyone. And I think the reason I love talking about these sorts of things, you're sharing your story. I've spoken to so many people that have shared different stories, but kind of coming at a similar point. And every single person that is on the bus or on the train or walking down the street or at the supermarket or waiting in line to do something, they all have their stories as well. And there might be something that they're struggling with. There might be something that they're trying to do. And it's just, how can we best support everyone? And it's just kind of approaching life with just a bit of positivity, right? Just trying to be the best person we can be, and just have an awareness that everyone's brains have been developed in a certain way. And it doesn't mean that they're a bad person if they do an action or if they say something that might be construed as inappropriate or rude, or maybe they lose their temper with something that could be based on decades of trauma, and you just don't know. So I really appreciate you sharing.
And it's, of course, and it's amazing how real these things can feel in your head when you don't know exactly what's going on or why something happened or why you're reacting a certain way. It's just, to me, it's phenomenal how real this thing can feel in your head. But once you can take some time to look at it and break it down a little bit, how quickly it can also fall apart.
Yeah, for sure. So you spoke a little bit about the process of kind of becoming a father to your now daughter and what that looked like early on. is there a moment where you knew that like I'm her father now? Like this is it. Like was there a certain point in the relationship that happened? Did it happen quite early or quite late? Was it that moment when she called you dad for the first time, or asked to call you dad, which is adorable, by the way?
Oh yeah, yeah, but that did terrify me. I'm not quite as scared of it now as I was when she first asked. Um, I can actually tell you the exact moment where I came to believe that this is my daughter. Like this is the
Mm.
child I'm going to help my wife raise. And it was actually kind of funny because I went over to Kim's at the time. I went over to her house, and when I walked into the living room, I'm taking off my shoes, and I look over, and Jasmine's sitting on the couch, and there's like food plates and wrappers and toys all over the table. And it just came out. I turned to her and I said, "Look, little girl, you need to turn off this TV and get that stuff off the table now. Your mom is in the kitchen cleaning. I can hear her. You need to get the stuff off the table instead of just sitting there in the middle of all this trash."
Mm.
And as soon as it all came out, because it all just came out, as soon as I said it, I felt like I'd stepped over a boundary, because
Yeah. Okay.
I believed up until that point that I was the boyfriend and Jasmine was Kim's daughter.
Mm.
And so I had made this rule to myself, this unspoken rule, that I was only allowed to discipline her to a point. And I always had to watch out for Kim and make sure that Kim's boundaries were respected. But we hadn't actually talked about it. This was just a thing that was in my head. This is not my child. This is Kim's child. I have to keep a distance. And so I walked into the kitchen because I know she heard me. I walked in the kitchen to apologize. And when I walk in, she's sitting up against the fridge like this. And I could see her laughing. And I was like, that's not the reaction I expected. I thought she was going to be mad. So when I walked in there and I saw that, I said, what's so funny? What are you laughing at? And she looks at me and she says, "It's about time." I said, "About time for what?" And she says, "I have been waiting for you to step up for months. And you have finally done it. It is about time." And
Interesting.
that's when I realized all this stuff came into my head, and I realized, okay, so this was an unspoken rule that I made for myself without talking about it. This is just what I believed, and I didn't even realize I had believed that until we had the conversation. And Kim told me that she appreciated that I was being a father instead of just being the man in her life. I was the father now. And so that's what helped me to realize. And Kim, bless her soul, she was so patient with me. But that's what got me to realize that, okay, so I am father now. I am dad, and I need to be a father.
Mm. Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it's interesting you have that kind of like that clear moment as well, and about time. That's really funny. Yeah, I think
Oh yeah, I got a kick out of it.
yeah, for sure. But yeah, just kind of stepping up and stepping in as well, and stepping into that role, super important. And again, that kind of highlights the communication, because you had this whole perspective on what was expected, but maybe it wasn't kind of based on anything. It was just kind of where you had arrived just by yourself, which is I think it was out of a place of respect, but maybe not out of a place of the communication with the partner to know what to say and when to say it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to work out. I've done so I'm guessing your daughter's is she about 8 or 9 now? You've been in her life for about 3 years.
Yeah, that's right. She's going to be 9 on January 26th.
Okay, cool. So she's going to be 9. So I'm just wondering. I'm trying to think of 9. I used to teach, so like 6, 7-year-olds. I'm trying to think of a 9-year-old of what they would understand. Like kids are getting more mature than when we were 9-year-olds, from what I found and my interactions with them. I'm curious, do you have any plans or ideas in terms of raising your daughter and for her to know kind of your your journey, let's say, and your story with these details? Because, like, what does that look like? Have you had any thoughts about that?
Yeah, of course. So Jasmine and Kim, it's been just them two
Mm,
for, up until Jazz was about 6.5.
mm,
It was just those two people in together in their own lives. And so there are some things that Jasmine is behind in, because has been working a full-time job for that girl's
mm,
entire life. And so there's things that Kim hasn't had the time to do, or she's been lacking a little bit. And for me as an author, what's really important for me is that Jasmine reads fluently. And so she's almost 9 years old, but she's still reading at a kindergarten level.
right.
And I know that she's got the potential to do it. I know
Mm,
she does, because I've seen the things that she's capable of. And it all started with video games. We would be playing a video game, and as soon as the first thing went wrong, she set down the controller and said she couldn't do it.
right.
And
Wow.
so that's been a really big recurring theme in my relationship with my daughter, is making sure she knows that she can do something that she wants to do.
Yeah.
And now, help me, please, because I can't get the controller away from her. And so, but she knows that she can do it because I've seen her do it. I've seen her try the same level 55 or 60 times, to the
Wow.
point where she's starting to cry because she's so frustrated, but she still won't give me the controller. And so there's a little bit of pride that I have in that, because she
Mm,
believes that she can do it. And
mm,
reading is another one of those things. She's been
yeah.
struggling with it because Kim doesn't have that time
Mm,
that two parents would have to work jobs and to teach their children.
mm,
And so she's learning reading from the school, she's learning reading from her parents, she's learning reading from the babysitter. But the way that she learns is that she has to find something consistent, which is something that I'm trying to put into her life, is some semblance of consistency, so that she can learn to read, and she can learn about money.
mm,
I have a whiteboard in the hallway I call it the daddy bank. And anytime she wants to earn some money, she can do a job with me. And I
mm.
actually pay her an hourly rate. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not paying her, the hourly rate that I'm getting at my job, but I am paying her an hourly rate, and it is above minimum wage for anyone curious. I
Wow.
follow the law. And so she can help me with the dishes. She can help me with the laundry. And I keep track of her time. So that helps her to understand, okay, this amount of time equals this amount of money.
Mm,
And we had a moment at Target, one of the stores here in town. We had a moment where I went to go pick something up that I had ordered online, and she wanted to go look at the toys. But her
mm,
daddy bank balance at the time was like $5.50. It wasn't much, because we had just started like the day before. And so we went to look at the toys, and she wanted this one and this one and this one and this one. And I'm using this as a teaching experience.
mm,
Well, okay, this is your bank balance.
mm,
Look at what you can get with this bank balance. And it wasn't much. She wanted the $25 toys, which I understand.
mm,
So in the end, she decided, and this is so far my proudest moment, she decided not to get the cheap toys. She wanted to come back home and do dishes,
mm.
so
Wow.
that she could earn more money to get the Elsa doll, or the Elsa. It was like a
Mm,
wand or something, or a bow and arrow. It was a $25 toy, and that's the one that she wanted.
mm,
And so to see that what I am trying to teach her is being learned, helps me to believe in myself as a father figure more,
mm.
because these positive lessons that I'm trying to teach my daughter, they're sticking.
Yeah.
And so that right there was a really big moment of pride for me, that she decided to save her money for the toy that she wanted,
Mm,
instead of spending it on a little bouncy ball or something.
mm. That's awesome.
So that's
That's
what
really
I'm
cool.
trying to get her. Yeah, for the future. Thank you. That's what I'm
Mm,
trying to get instilled in her for the future, is
mm,
the understanding that she can do these things if she puts forth the effort. And
mhm.
so far, it seems to be working pretty well.
I like how you've kind of got your overarching goal of it, teaching that she can do something if she puts the effort in. That what I try and teach my kids always is if they can't do something yet. So my kids are currently 2 and 3. The 3, by the time this comes out, the 3-year-old will be 4. When it's the case of like learning to put your shoes on, or learning to put your coat on by yourself, or building the train track, or fixing something, whatever it might be, we really try and like catch them if they say, "Oh, I can't do it." It's like, well, maybe you can't do it yet, but if you keep trying, and maybe I try and help you and show you, I'm not going to do it for you, or maybe I'll do it for you like the first time, but then I'll show you, and then I'll teach you, and then you'll get to a point where you still can't do it yet, but you try, and then and then it keeps this journey going. And I think it's so important to have that main goal. Like mine's a little bit different to yours, but it's essentially the same thing. And you kind of have that main overarching goal of why you teach your kids things, and then you kind of funnel that down into kind of being financially responsible, like you're talking about. And like you've chosen to do it this way with a daddy bank, where she helps with chores and she gets a balance, and then she can go to the store and do this. That's amazing. I'm so glad that's worked for you. There might be fathers listening that are like, "Oh, I did the exact same thing, and my kid didn't care," like, and they still didn't get the financial responsibility. And that's what's so funny, I think, about parenting, is that what can work really well for you might not work for someone else. But as long as they have that overarching goal of teaching kids of how to do something or why to do something, that they can do things, then they just need to adjust that daddy bank or whatever it might be to fit their situation and fit their child a little bit better. So that's just my tips to any fathers out there. And I love hearing specific things like that. Just to circle back a little bit to the reading as well. I've spoken about this to a few guests recently. I just published one where we spoke about reading as well. As a former teacher to 6 and 7-year-olds, especially kids that had like been through COVID during their very early school years or preschool years, I would teach reading to a class that was just like, some were so far ahead and some were so far behind, because of, it was such a highlighting of their home environment. And like, kind of similar to what you're saying, some of the parents just don't have time to invest 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day into reading stories for their kids. And some parents do. And in my classes, there was such a huge divide there, but I prioritize teaching reading so much. And it's not just like teaching the skills of reading, it's teaching a interest and a love of reading. And that if a kid comes to you and comes to the library and says, "Oh, there are no interest in books, there's no books I want," it's because they haven't learned how to kind of book shop yet and find something that they're interested in. The little hack is like, my kids in my classes, they loved Minecraft. So our library was full of Minecraft books. They'll just go in there and it's like, they can't read yet, but they want to pick up the Minecraft book because the Minecraft book tells them how to do things in Minecraft. So now they want to start reading the Minecraft book. So they'll come and like, oh, now they're interested in a book. And, it's not, and it's just kind of finding that avenue to go down. And it looks different for every single child. And it looks different for the parent relationship with the kid and the teacher's relationship with the child as well. So if you got your daddy bank, have you got something in place to try and help with reading then at home with your daughter?
I a little bit. I'm still working that one out. But what I've found helps me with my daughter is to try to find a way to teach her that, well, let me backtrack a little bit. I have to figure out how she learns.
Yeah.
And if I work with her that way, instead of insisting that I teach her the way that I was taught, if I can work with her and figure out how she learns these things, if I can just swallow my pride a little bit, then everything becomes quite a bit easier. And so what I've found with her reading is that obviously if I find a book that's on a subject that she already likes, she really loves the Berenstain Bears. Oh yeah. Which I just floats my boat because that's what I was raised on too, and I'm so happy that she likes those books. But also like the Disney books and stuff like that, the princess books, because she was named after a Disney princess, and so she loves all the Disney princesses,
of course.
And so if I can find the books to teach her the way that she will learn, not to teach her the way that I've been taught, but to teach her the way that she will learn. That makes things that's a lot less of a bumpy ride for me. And so that's what I'm trying to figure out with the books is to pick things up that she likes. She likes the wonder books, the ones that read to you. And so, but she also just she's at that age where she just loves the fact that I'm there and I'm willing to spend this time with her. She actually told me something about a month ago started me crying. I had to turn away from her because I didn't want her to see this. But she had a school assignment and she had to do 20 minutes of reading with one of her parents. And so I let her pick the book. And at this time, I knew that she probably wasn't going to do that great. But it didn't say that she had to read 20 pages. It said she had to read 20 minutes. And so I had to kind of deal with the constant, hey, Dad, will you read this to me for the first 5 or 6? But when she knew that, this is the assignment and I expect you to follow the assignment and I'm not going to let you cheat on it. And so we got a book and she read maybe 9 pages. It was one of those books that's like 2 sentences per page. But it was called Pete the Cat and the Bad Banana. I remember.
Okay. Yeah. I know Pete the Cat books. Yeah.
Yeah. And so she wanted to read about Pete the Cat. So we got through 9 pages of this. And when the 20 minutes was up, then she was done. And if she wanted to continue to read, she could. If she wanted me to finish the book to her, then I was willing to do that. But she did her 20 minutes. So she knew that I wasn't going to be soft. And I think that's a real big thing when it comes to kids. If they think that they can kind of take advantage of you a little bit, they're going to do it. And which is exactly what I would have done at 8 years old. If my dad will make this easier, if my mom will make this easier, I'm going to let him do it.
Yeah.
So, but when we got home that night, we were getting ready for bed. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, she just turns around and gives me this big old hug. And she said, Dad, thank you for working so hard for me.
Aw.
And I had to turn around. And I still get choked up about it now because up until that point, I was worried that she was going to resent me a little bit for making her do it, what I felt like was the right way. I will teach her the way that she will learn, but I won't let her cheat. And so when she thanked me for it, that was when I understood, okay, I did the right thing. It was nice to be validated and know that I did the right thing and I did it the right way and that she was grateful for it instead of hating me for it.
No, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing. That's when kids start to appreciate like what we're doing, because obviously parents do so much for children, but it's not for appreciation. We never expect our kids to thank us or show appreciation to us because they're children, and like this is our role as a parent. So the few times that they do that, it is like it really kind of catches you by surprise. Just to wrap up on the reading thing. Interestingly, you mentioned Berenstein. Like I didn't know Berenstain Bears. I'm English, grew up in England, had lots of different books, but we came into some Berenstain Bears books here through like someone was giving them away. Through our church. So then we got them. And then my son, who was about just over 3 at the time, he just loved them because they were so long. They were longer than any of the books that we had been reading through. Like we had all the Dr. Seuss books. We had Elephant Piggy books. I mean, we have so many books. It's ridiculous. Like I've said on this podcast before, if anyone's listening, like my problem when it comes to shopping is buying books for my kids. It's absurd. But
yeah, I remember hearing that on your episode with James. He said the same thing.
Yeah. And so we got these Berenstain Bears books and I was like, oh, these are interesting. And they were just like, he would come to me, he's like, can you read this Berenstain Bears book? I was like, oh, they're so long. It's like, I'm so pleased that you as a 3-year-old want to sit with me and listen to me read this book, which like gets to about 10 minutes without you asking any questions. And if you're going to ask questions on every page, it's going to be about 15 minutes. But they have stories, they have messages. They have a message to deliver with each one, which was really nice. So Reading is amazing, and I think the one thing I want to add for anyone that is out there that is not struggling, but who is thinking about how to teach reading, it looks different in so many different ways. Like sitting and reading a book at bedtime will look different to asking your child to try and do a bit of reading themselves, and that will look different to trying to sound out some basic phonic letters when they're young, and then that can transfer when you're out and about. Like my son will always just like, he starts to shout out words that he recognizes. He'll shout, "Oh look, there's no," or "there's yes," and that's reading, you know. And if you're supporting that as a parent, then that is reading. And that, like, if you're aiming for 20 minutes a day or 30 minutes a day, you can be on the train and trying to help him read a sign, and like that counts as you teaching your kid reading. So yeah, I love it. It's such but when schools try to tell parents, "Oh, you must be doing this, you must be doing that," it can get a little bit difficult. It's like, "Oh, I'm not doing it. We didn't do it today," and feel bad about it. Like, come at it from a place of love, come at it from a place of enjoyment, expression, interest. That maybe will lead us on, talking about reading, talking about writing. That can maybe lead us on to, maybe you can share a little bit about your new book, your poetry. But I want to kick things off with this. I'm just wondering, would you say writing poetry has any relationship to your fatherhood journey?
Vastly, yes.
Okay.
So a little bit of quick history. I was raised in a house that, because of my father, didn't allow any real feelings. See, we weren't allowed to express emotion or
Right.
anything that he could construe as being a weakness. One of the quotes that I remember from my father as a child was, he sat me down one day and he said, "There's only two things that you're allowed to feel. That is hungry and angry, and that's it."
Oh my gosh.
And so I
Oh my
carried that
gosh.
for a long time.
Yeah.
Now
Jeez.
I'm getting through my journey now, so that I can see how
Mm,
asinine that was now.
mm,
But as a child, when you're sat down by your father with it and it's so serious, that's what our family was like. That's the things that I was allowed to feel
wow.
publicly in front of my father. And so as a teenager, writing became my expression,
Mm,
because I knew that the notebook or the journal wasn't going to judge me or accuse me of anything. And I'm not going to say any of it was any good when I was 15 years old, but it got the emotions out.
yeah.
And so as I got older and I started reading other people's poetry, and that changed my style. And I picked, I'd pick up something from this writer or this writer. And so over the next 20 years or so, I developed my own style. And one of the things that I developed was this solid belief that we should be allowed to express in a healthy manner,
Mm-hmm.
as long as we're not damaging other people.
Mm-hmm.
Then we should be allowed to express, like,
Mm,
this is the thing I'm feeling, here it is.
mm,
And so on my website, one of the quotes that I have on my website is I tell people to join me and lay out your mental baggage for everyone to see and burn it to ash.
mm,
And so that's the process I have with my last book. It's essentially me, putting my pre-sobriety emotions into poetry, the transitioning period, which is called self-reflection in the book.
mm,
And then part 3 is my resurrection, where I begin to express my healing and my desire to be more mentally healthy,
mm,
and to be able to just put my emotions out there without feeling any shame for it, because
mm,
I was made to feel shame when I was a child for the feelings that
mm,
I had. And so that's what the book is about. It's just this transition, this process from, my self-destruction to my self-reflection, and then on to my resurrection.
mm. Wow. So if people want to check it out, can you tell us a little bit about the book? What's it called? Where can they go and find out more about it, or your website?
Yeah, of course. So for the people that have the video, sorry if it's going to be reversed, but that's what the
Should be
cover
fine.
looks like.
Awesome.
It's called Long Live the Lonely: Poetry and Prose for Melancholy Souls. It is currently available on Amazon in digital, paperback, and hardcover. I don't know if anyone in Cheyenne, Wyoming is going to be listening to this, but it'll be available here in Cheyenne at Constant Reader Books and Bonsai Books here in town. And
Awesome.
it's been fun. It was a 2-year journey to get all these words onto the paper and get it edited and put out for print. But it's been rewarding. It's definitely a rewarding experience. And the website is neverstaybroken.com. And it's
Awesome.
I do blog entries. I don't have a schedule. I write a blog entry when something strikes me, but it's just more of me putting out my whatever's going on in my life, and just I try to tell people that it's okay. It's okay to feel these things. It's okay to talk about it. And I've gotten some pretty good feedback on it so far.
That's awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for bringing that. And yeah, I agree that we can talk about it. And I think the biggest thing, just to add my 2 cents onto this topic of like having feelings and sharing feelings, is getting caught up. Yeah, feeling shame for feelings, but being aware of how to share feelings, kind of like we alluded to earlier, with a partner or with a family member, and knowing that not every person is like, they're not a journal. You can't just come at them and just be like, here's all my stuff, because that can impact them in a certain way. So coming to some arrangement of writing poetry or writing journals or taking notes or making music or having a creative outlet like a podcast, which is, partly like where it's partly for me.
Exactly.
Like,
Exactly.
you need that. And like, that's a real journey that at least I went on, and realizing that like feelings are feelings and it's fine to have these feelings, but then it's what you do with them that is important to know. So yeah, I'll put all the links in the description as well for anyone who does want to go over and check that out. So as we come up towards the end, CJ, if you've listened to any episodes before, you should know what the final question should be. As we come to the end, we like to ask, think back to that time before you became a dad. For you, I'm guessing it would have been. It's interesting you had this relationship with your daughter like through a drive-through window, which is really curious. So I'm guessing,
yeah.
So before you got into this relationship with your now partner, your now wife, and before you became a dad to your daughter, what advice do you think CJ needed back then in terms of becoming a partner?
My advice, if I could go back, my advice to myself would probably be, I didn't believe that I could be a father if I hadn't had a father.
Yeah.
And it was, again, an unspoken rule that I had in my head that I couldn't do it. If you don't know what love looks like, how can you give love to somebody else?
Yeah.
And so I lived on that for the first several months that Kim and I were together. And I would have loved to go back and tell myself, you can still give love without getting love.
Yeah.
You just got to learn the right way to do it. And so love is a weird thing. It's like a smile. You can give one away. You can give away a smile, but it's kind of hard to give away a smile if you don't have one. And it seems a little paradoxical that you can give love without ever having received love, but you can do it.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just reminded of Elmer. Do you know Elmer, the elephant, the patchwork elephant, the children's stories? Have you heard of that before?
No, actually, I haven't heard of that one.
I think
I'll have to check it out.
I assume it's British, but there's a story, Elmer and the Rainbow. So basically, Elmer is this patchwork elephant. Sorry for this tangent, but I think I really want to add it.
It's okay. It's okay.
There's this patchwork elephant who goes very, very charismatic, very interesting, like lovely character who lives in a herd of just other great elephants. And there's this there's a story called Elmer and the Rainbow, when the storm finishes and all the animals are talking about if there's going to be a rainbow, and they come out and there's just this big grey thing in the sky. And then they say, oh, the rainbow came out too soon. It's lost its colours. And then Elmer says, oh, if we find the end of the rainbow, I can give it my colours. And all the other animals are like, Elmer's going to give away his colours. What's going to happen to him? Is he going to become grey like the rest of us? And then they find the rainbow, and then he does it, and then he comes out, and he's still got all of his beautiful colours. And all the other animals are like, Elmer, like, what happened? You've still got your colours. And then Elmer, it's just this like really hard hitting point. It's like, well, if you didn't know, there are some things you can give away and never lose any of. Things like love or my colours. And I was just like, wow, Elmer.
Wow, this is pretty deep for a kid's book. I like that.
Exactly. And like not every episode, not every story has a message like that. So it's just really surprising. But I think that's a nice kind of addition to what you're kind of alluding to there. That once you learn how to do it, once you have it, it's not like a currency. It's not like you have to receive it from others to then give it out. It's like if we can come to an arrangement ourselves, we can find it within ourselves and give it out and still not lose it, which is amazing as a father. So CJ, thanks so much for coming on, being so open with us and honest with us. I really appreciate the time you've taken today. Thank you for joining us for the Dad Dialogue podcast today. And there we have another Dad Dialogue conversation. Of course, a huge thank you goes out to CJ for coming on the show and sharing his stories with us. I really appreciated CJ's vulnerability in opening up and sharing with us, as he's got such a traumatic past and such a big story to share. But it was really, really impactful to me, especially as you would have heard in the episode. I found it really interesting actually talking to someone who had been through the alcoholic process of going to AA. And it really brought it to light for me that the image that I have of it was fully just made up through media, like TV shows and film. I'd never really spoken to someone who'd been through this or known someone that had been through this. So it really kind of brought it home to me, and to kind of see that struggle and the challenges evolved, but also the incredible support that CJ was able to get, and how he arrived at getting better, at getting over it, was through different support networks being in place and not just relying on one particular person, or relying on himself even, but appreciating the help of others and seeing that come through. And you can really see how much he's now able to love his daughter, who he kind of adopted when he married his now wife. I found it just a really uplifting story, and it was really nice to see. I loved hearing some of CJ share about wanting to encourage his daughter with reading and getting her to do the things that he knows she can do. So yeah, it was really nice to hear from CJ with that. As CJ mentioned, he did mention his book. It's called Long Live the Lonely, Poetry and Prose for Melancholy Souls by CJ Robinson. There'll be a link in the description if you'd like to go check out that. He also has a website, he mentioned, and it's called neverstaybroken.com. There'll be a link to that if you want to go check that out as well. From my side, as always, you can go to daddialogue.co.uk if you'd like to get in touch with the podcast in any way. I truly appreciate your time. Thank you for spending it with us today. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope to talk to you again soon. Goodbye.